The Tragedy of Italy. The invasion of Italy by Charles VIII was the opening of a tragedy lasting almost 400 years, during which France, Spain, and Austria turned Italy into a bloody battleground. Hardly was Lorenzo de' Medici gone, than peace, too, was gone. Angry Italian voices everywhere were crying out, begging for help, to destroy one another. Quite forgetful of his father's maxims for peace, Charles accepted the invitation of Ludovico Sforza. The tragic drama therefore opens in Milan. Scene 1. Milan, a room in the palace. Ludovico Sforza, also called Il Moro, a dark man with olive skin, elegantly dressed, his long fingers loaded with rings, is talking with his young wife Beatrice. She is wearing a lovely mesh cap edged with pearls, for Leonardo da Vinci had been painting her portrait. Beatrice is worried about the future of their young son, because, although Ludovico Sforza had been ruler of Milan for 13 years, he does not have the legal right to rule. He does not hold the title of Duke, nor did his father, Francisco Sforza, hold the title of Duke, for the reason that he had married into the Visconti family which held that title, and had seized the power when the old Duke of Visconti died, leaving no heir. Ludovico agrees with his wife Beatrice that he should be called Duke. The one person that can give him that title is the German Emperor Maximilian. So he composes a letter to Maximilian offering his niece Bianca Sforza in marriage and also 400,000 ducats in exchange for being made Duke of Milan. Scene 2. Milan, the courtyard of the palace. The time is March 1494. The day after the wedding by proxy of Bianca and Maximilian, also celebrated by the unveiling of the statue of her grandfather, Francisca Sforza, on horseback, which Leonardo da Vinci had finally finished. As the scene opens, Leonardo stands alone, gazing up at the statue, considering, since this is only a plaster model, how to have it cast in bronze. Il Moro, now Duke of Milan, enters, exchanges a few words with Leonardo, who hastens away, leaving Il Moro to pace back and forth in deep concern. Now he is worried that he may be deposed by the King of Naples, because, even though he now has the title of Duke, he still has not the right to be ruling Milan. During the past 13 years, he has been only acting as regent for his young nephew. Having ruled well, being a capable man, he does not wish, now that his nephew has come of age, to hand over power to him. The nephew, being an idle, luxury-loving, no-account fellow, does not want it, but his young wife does, and Ludovico fears that she will call upon her father for help, and her father is the King of Naples. Il Moro comes to a decision, goes into the palace, and writes a letter to the King of France. Scene 3. France, the castle of Amboise. Charles VIII, now 24, still small, big-headed, and bandy-legged, is pondering over the letter that has just come from Milan. Ludovico Sforza promises him free passage through northern Italy, plus 200,000 ducats, if he will come, attack the King of Naples, and capture his throne. This is very tempting, because the French have an ancient claim to the throne of Naples. However, the King of Naples is a Spaniard, a relative of Ferdinand of Aragon, whom Charles does not wish to stir up. He is also a good friend of the Spanish Pope, Alexander VI. On the other hand, there is an Italian, Cardinal Rovere, a warlike man who hates the Pope. The monk Savonarola, too, has been writing Charles to come and rid Italy of that vile father of the Church, as well as to free Florence from the wicked Medicis. Charles decides to accept Il Moro's invitation. Louis of Orleans, his brother-in-law, enters the room. As an older man and experienced soldier, he advises Charles to take a force of 40,000 men. He himself will go as far as Milan. Louis has reasons of his own for taking a look at the Duchy of Milan. Very special reasons. Scene 4, Asti, a room at the inn. It is a stifling day in early August 1494. French soldiers are milling about. Charles VIII walks in dressed in uniform. With him is Louis of Orleans, who acts and talks as if this town of Asti belonged to him. The Duke of Milan is announced. He enters, tall, dark, handsome, elegant in dress and manner. He meets the King of France for the first time, and also Louis of Orleans, which is an unpleasant surprise. The Duke says that his young wife has come with him to meet the French visitors and is at the castle, where Leonardo da Vinci is preparing entertainment for them. The elegant Sforza then departs, mopping his brow and casting an uneasy glance at Louis of Orleans for good reason. The town of Asti does belong to Louis of Orleans. He had inherited it from his grandmother, a Visconti of Milan, the original Visconti family from whom Francisco Sforza had seized the duchy. What does Louis of Orleans think? That Milan is rightfully his? He says he is going no further. Charles will proceed on to Naples alone. The sooner they both go, the better for Il Moro, who is already beginning to wonder what he has let himself in for. Scene 5, Florence, from Piazza to Palace. November 9th, 1494. The Signoria, or Council, has just adjourned. The hall is buzzing with excitement. Outside on the piazza can be heard angry voices of the crowd crying, "Down with the Medici," and calling Pietro a traitor and a coward. Pietro de' Medici had handed over to the King of France all the border forts which protected Florence. Without consulting the council, as his father Lorenzo would have done, Pietro met the French king at Pisa, got panicky at sight of the huge French army, and gave Charles VIII free passage through Florence on the way to Naples. The Signoria have just passed a decree banishing the Medici, offering 4,000 florins for the head of Pietro and 2,000 florins each for the heads of Giovanni and Giuliano. "Down with the Medici!" the people scream. "Down with the Medici!" They rush to the Medici palace. Mobs of people turned loose to plunder and destroy go tramping through beautiful halls and gardens. Treasures that took 50 years to collect are being carted off. Precious objects ruthlessly smashed. The Medici brothers flee for their lives. Scene 6, Rome, the papal apartment. Pope Alexander VI, rather portly and short of breath, is waiting to receive Charles VIII. He has returned to the Vatican from the Castel Angelo, a fortress on the Tiber River, where he took refuge when Charles reached Rome and was welcomed by the Pope's enemies, the chief one being Cardinal Rovere. The Pope had already sent an appeal for help to the Sultan of Turkey, warning him that after Naples, the French king planned to attack Constantinople. He then sent a cautious message to Charles and is now waiting for him. Knowing that the Pope had sent an appeal to the Sultan, Charles is fearful that he may also appeal to Ferdinand of Aragon, who might well invade France while he is gone. Caesar Borgia, the Pope's son, is now introduced. It is arranged that he, the big handsome bullfighter, shall go with Charles to Naples as a hostage. Scene 7. Naples, the King's Palace. The King of Naples has gone. He has given over the city, kingdom, and palace to the French without any resistance and simply departed. Charles VIII is blissfully enjoying the palace, the view of the blue bay and Mount Vesuvius, the gaiety and music, all the joys of Naples. He is so enraptured that he has not even noticed that his hostage is gone. Caesar Borgia has escaped and returned to Rome. Charles heads home. Pope Alexander's courage is instantly renewed at the sight of his son Caesar. With his usual vigor, he bounces back into action and organizes a league to drive the French out of Italy. Those who join him are Ferdinand of Aragon, the Emperor Maximilian, the Doge of Venice, and one more, the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. After having felt Louis of Orleans breathing down his neck, Sforza has grown more and more remorseful for having invited Charles VIII to Italy. Charles VIII, seeing no ally left in Italy except Savonarola, who had refused to be associated with the vile Pope, knows that the wise thing for him to do is to get out and go home to France as fast as possible, which he does. The King of Naples returns. The invasion accomplished nothing for the French, but it marked a turning point in history. It showed the kings of Europe how weak and divided Italy was, and how easily it could be invaded and conquered, and made them all, French, German, and Spanish, eager to try. Finale. In addition to joining the pact against France, the Emperor Maximilian and Ferdinand of Aragon make a private treaty to be sealed by a double wedding of their sons and daughters. The infant Juan is betrothed to Margaret of Austria. The infanta Juana is to marry Philip the Handsome. Juana and Philip. Queen Isabella spent the summer of 1496 assembling a large fleet for the purpose of exchanging the two brides, to carry Juana to Philip the Handsome in Flanders, and to bring back Margaret of Austria to the infant Don Juan. On the morning of August 22nd, 120 top-heavy ships with huge square sails were creaking and rocking in the Spanish harbor of Laredo. On board were 20,000 people to accompany the infanta Juana, ladies in waiting from the noblest families of the bluest blood, chaplains, stewards, clerks, and countless lesser members make up the royal retinue. In the last precious moments before departure, Isabella is standing beside her daughter on the deck of the royal ship, but only a word or two breaks their silence. Juana was a strange child. Of her 5 children, Isabella understood Juana the least. She was a tense, silent girl with dark, mysterious eyes. Juana silently watched the others who had come to see her off. There was Juan, friendly and gracious in his gentle manner, who would soon be welcoming his own bride. Isabel, 26, was a young widow. She might soon be going back to Portugal, since the new King Manuel wished to marry her. Maria, always even-tempered, was the only one so far whose marriage had not yet been arranged. Catalina, who was 11, had been promised for 9 years to Arthur, the Crown Prince of England. Ferdinand, who had arranged all these weddings, was not there to bid his daughter Juana farewell. He was still in Barcelona, occupied with manipulations against the French. The queen was sad to see Juana leave, and also worried about the autumn storms on the English Channel. She had already written King Henry VII for hospitality, fearing the ships bearing the Infanta might have to take refuge in one of the English ports. Her fears were justified. The Spanish vessels were caught in a bad storm as they entered the English Channel. 2 went down in a roaring wind that tossed them about and drove all the others into the English harbor of Portland. After some time the sailors ventured forth again, and finally they landed on the sandy banks of Zealand at Middleburg. Juana had to be carried ashore, seasick and ill with a terrible cold. The handsome Philip was not there to meet his bride. Juana was in Antwerp, still in bed with her cold, when her new family came to welcome her. There was Margaret, Philip's sister, so charming and easy to know, and the beautiful young grandmother, who was called Madame Legrand. A courier had been sent for Philip, who was then in Austria. October 20th was the date set for the wedding, which was to take place in Lille. Actually, it took place the night before, because that evening, with much clatter of hoofs in the courtyard, Philip arrived, much too impatient to wait. One look at that handsome young man, and Juana was madly in love. So they were married that night, and their passionate, tumultuous, tragic life together began. Next day, the Bishop of Cambrai, the patron of Erasmus, performed the formal church ceremony, after which, in celebration, the jolly burghers danced so hard and long back and forth across the town bridge that it collapsed into the river. Juana's long-repressed spirit burst all bounds, pouring itself out in adoration of her young husband, but making her so jealous and possessive that his own ardor shortly began to cool. He loved her, to be sure, but he also loved many other girls, and he had no plan of changing his ways because of her jealousy. Juana was grieved to find that his love was not as deep as her own, and she soon began to look and act unhappy. She appeared almost miserable at Margaret's wedding to her brother Juan, which took place by proxy early in November. Margaret, wearing a gold crown, was radiant. At 16, 5 years after losing the King of France, she was being married to another royal prince, the Infant Juan of Castile and Aragon. Early in January, her brother Philip escorted her to Middleburg, where the Spanish fleet was still waiting to take her to the bridegroom she had not yet seen. The Spanish sailors had grown impatient to be off, even though it was winter and the return voyage would surely be a stormy one. It proved to be far worse than the first. This time the battered ships were blown into the English harbor of Southampton. Margaret received a letter from Henry VII, inviting her to stay as long as she wished. The ships set out again as soon as possible, everyone on board being impatient to reach Spain and have the agony over. In the Bay of Biscay, however, the storm became so terrible that no one expected to reach any port alive. But even on the worst day, facing death, Margaret kept her sense of humor. She wrote this little epitaph, had it rolled in wax, and fastened to her wrist with a few gold pieces for her burial. Here lies Margot, the gentle maiden, who had 2 husbands, but died a virgin. Queen Isabella, waiting at Burgos, was again extremely worried about the fate of the fleet. She sent for Columbus, who was still at court, and asked his opinion as an expert navigator. Did he or did he not believe that the ships from the Netherlands would arrive safely? Columbus assured her that they would, and his prediction proved to be true. On March 8th, 1497, the ships were washed ashore at the port of Santander. Ferdinand and Don Juan were there to meet the bride and escort her to Burgos. Margaret, riding between them on horseback, charming them both with her natural manner, must have been struck by the contrast between father and son. On the one hand, she saw a shrewd, worldly man. On the other, a poetic-looking lad of 18, pale and slender, with a narrow face and large, dark, almost melancholy eyes. In the city hall of Burgos, hung with richly colored tapestries for her formal reception, Margaret met and knelt before the real ruler of Spain, Queen Isabella. In a few days, the older woman and the girl, who were much alike in their outlook and ability, became close friends. Juan and Margaret, sharing love of poetry and music, and complementing each other in temperament, were soon happily in love. Although Margaret did not speak Spanish, there was no language barrier, for, being well educated, they both spoke Latin. On April 3rd, 1497, the marriage ceremony was performed in the cathedral at Burgos by the Archbishop of Toledo. Among the guests who were there to admire the young couple was Christopher Columbus. 3 weeks later, as a result of the Admiral's happy prediction about Margaret's safe arrival, the sovereigns issued the first definite orders for a fleet to be prepared for him. It would, however, take a full year of preparation before Columbus could start on his third voyage to the New World. His sons, Diego and Ferdinand, meanwhile, as pages to the bridegroom, were enjoying a succession of splendid entertainments given for Don Juan and Dona Margarita following their wedding in Toledo. Margaret sparkled and responded gaily to the festivities which were held in various cities. But Don Juan, who was very delicate, soon became exhausted. The circles under his eyes grew deeper and darker as the strenuous pace continued. On the 1st of October, 1497, word reached Ferdinand and Isabella that, in the midst of the festivities at Salamanca, Juan had been taken desperately ill. Ferdinand left at once, but Juan was dying when he reached his bedside. He was only 19. Margaret could not believe it. In a few months their baby would be born, and Juan would never see it. All the land was in lamentation and mourning. Black banners floated over every tower and gateway. Rich and poor went about in the sackcloth of mourning. Diego and Ferdinand, all in black, were now taken as pages at her own court by Queen Isabella. Life must go on, even though her son and heir to the throne was gone. There was the comforting hope that Juan's child might be a boy, and he could take the place of his young father. Margaret passionately shared that hope, but unhappily her baby, a little girl, was born dead. What now? Where was she to go? What a strange thing her life was. Fortune, misfortune, fortune, misfortune. But I still have hope, she thought. From my childhood I have had hope, and wish that I may always have it. Soon a letter came from England that gave Margaret something to do that she enjoyed, and it made her feel useful. It was a letter to Queen Isabella from the Spanish ambassador in London regarding Catalina, whom the English always called the Princess of Wales. The letter read, Queen Elizabeth, and also the mother of Henry VII, wished that the Princess of Wales should always speak French with the Princess Margot, who is now in Spain, to learn the language and to be able to talk it, as they, the queens, do not understand Latin, much less Spanish. 1 year after Juan's death, tragedy struck again. Queen Isabella lost her daughter Isabel, who, after Juan's death, had been heir to the throne. Isabel, who had been married about a year to King Manuel, the King of Portugal, lost her life in giving birth to a son, Miguel, who was now heir to the thrones of Castile, Aragon, and Portugal. John Cabot and Henry VII. It was in the summer of 1497, while Columbus was preparing for his third voyage, that Giovanni Cabot, who had also been born in Genoa and had also thought of reaching India by going west, sailed for Henry VII. The financially astute Henry VII, trying to replenish the treasuries of England after the Wars of the Roses, did not risk a precious penny on the venture, but he did gain a foothold in a large part of North America. The merchants of Bristol, England, who financed the voyage of their fellow townsmen, called him John Cabot. He had come to England from Venice, where, he told them, from the time he was old enough, he had sailed on Venetian ships throughout the eastern Mediterranean. How the spices which they picked up at the various ports got there from the land where they originated always puzzled him. Some, he learned, came from China by a long overland route that led through Samarkand to the Caspian Sea. Once in Mecca, the holy city of the Moslems, he had seen spices brought in by camel caravan across the Arabian desert. Most of the spices to be had in the great market of Alexandria were picked up in India in the port of Calicut and brought by boat up the Red Sea to Suez, and there taken by camels to the Egyptian port. All these ways were slow and costly. How much cheaper and simpler it would be if the goods from China and India could be brought to Europe all the way by water. Why not bring them across the Western Ocean, stopping at islands on the way? He had seen many maps in Venice which showed islands in the Atlantic, called Antillia and Brazil. If these could be found, they could serve as stepping stones across the ocean. The merchant seamen of Bristol became interested in Cabot's plan. Since they carried on a brisk trade with Iceland, carrying fish from there to Portugal, they too had heard of Antillia and Brazil, and thought that they must be somewhere southwest of Greenland. They were sending ships out to search for them until the summer of 1493. Then one of the pilots, returning from Lisbon, brought word that an Italian named Colombo or Colon, sailing for Queen Isabella, had already reached the Indies, or an island off the coast of China. John Cabot and the Bristol merchants quickly decided to forget about stepping stones and push on directly for the mainland. For this, they had to obtain permission from the king. After much delay, a paper came stating that Henry VII gave to his well-beloved John Cabot, citizen of Venice, and sons of said John, leave and power, upon their proper cost and charge, to seek out whatsoever isles which before this time have been unknown to all Christians. 1/5 of the net gain was to go to the king. On May 2nd, 1497, John Cabot, with 18 seamen, sailed from Bristol in a tiny ship, the Matthew. He steered north between Britain and Ireland toward Iceland. Then he turned west by south, and after 52 days at sea reached the northern edge of Cape Breton Island. There he had the royal banner of England unfurled and took possession of the country in the name of Henry VII. By August the 6th, the Matthew was back in Bristol Harbor. From there John Cabot hastened to London to make his report to King Henry VII, from whom he received £10 for having found the new isle, and later a pension of £20. In December 1497, Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, received a letter from his ambassador in London about Cabot's discovery. Most illustrious and most excellent lord, perhaps amidst so many occupations of your excellency, it will not be unwelcome to learn his majesty here has acquired a portion of Asia without so much as a stroke of his sword. In this kingdom there is a lower-classed Venetian named Juan Cabot, of fine mind, very expert in navigation, who, seeing the most serene kings, first of Portugal, then of Spain, have occupied unknown islands, meditated the achievement of a similar acquisition for his majesty aforesaid. Having obtained royal grants, he set out from Bristol, and having passed Ireland and wandered about considerably, at length he fell in with terra firma, where he set up the royal standard and came back again. The said Master Juan, being a foreigner and a poor man, would not be believed if the crew, who are nearly all English and from Bristol, did not testify that what he says is true. This Master Juan has a drawing of the world on a map on a solid globe which he has made, and shows the point he reached on the country of Asia. But Master Juan has set his mind on something greater, for he expects to go from that place already occupied, constantly hugging the shore, until he is opposite an island called Cipango, where he thinks grow all the spices of the world and also the precious stones. And he speaks of it in such a way that I too believe him. And what is more, his majesty here, who is wise and not lavish likewise, puts some faith in him. And it is said that in the spring his majesty will fit out some ships, and they will proceed to form a colony, by means of which they hope to make London a greater depot for spices than Alexandria. Your Excellency's most humble servant, Ramundus. In May of 1498, John Cabot again left Bristol, this time with 5 ships and 300 men. Earlier in the spring he had visited Lisbon and Seville to secure services of men who had sailed with Cam or Diaz, or better still, with Columbus. At Lisbon he met a Portuguese sailor named Lavrador, who had visited Greenland. So in the spring of 1498, after leaving Bristol, John Cabot sailed to Greenland and called it the land of Labrador. He followed north along the east coast of Greenland until the crews refused to go any farther. Turning about, he went down and around the end and up the west coast until icebergs blocked the way. Crossing the strait, he then followed south along the coast of the North American continent, almost to what is now Chesapeake Bay. He was looking for Cipango, Japan. By that time supplies were so low he had to give up hope of finding Japan until his next voyage. John Cabot never made another voyage. No one knows when or where he died. Some say only 4 ships returned safely to Bristol in 1498, and that the one on which John Cabot sailed was missing. For 50 years or more, the English were to give little thought to what John Cabot had found for them, and his capable but egotistical son, Sebastian, who, later in the service of Spain, always implied with a sad lack of loyalty that he, not his father, was truly the great voyager.